You'll be able to see good scenery from both sides of the aircraft because we're going to move around here quite a bit.
Enjoying it? Oh, it's been fantastic.
Mount Erebus, which is now coming up very rapidly on the left-hand side, is just over 13,000 feet. The actual crater is about 2.5 miles across.
Never seen anything like it in my life before.
He's on 901 Auckland on 13304, do you read?
Yeah. Hey, listen, I'll call you back. Peter? Oh, hell.
Get on to the boss.
Hello?
No, you're forcing it, Morrie. Now, if you left it and it bobbles, you're going to stop short every time. So just roll it smooth this time, OK?
Just a tick. Mr. Davis!
Bugger! What? It's been 4 hours since any contact. At 16:25, 901 was due at latitude 60 degrees south. At that point, it should have switched from McMurdo Air Traffic Control back to New Zealand. It's possible the plane has lost all on-board communication, in which case the first we'll see or hear of them is when they come within range of Dunedin radar.
When will that be?
Dunedin radar has a range of 2 degrees, which takes us down to here. 901 ought to be within range of that radar by 18:30 hours. That's half an hour from now. Until then, we keep all frequencies open, alert all aircraft in the area, keep in touch with search and rescue at McMurdo, and hope like hell that phone rings.
Bruce, how's it going?
Not good. How do we cover that vast, bloody ocean?
And so, it's over to Morrie Davis, Chief Executive of Air New Zealand, co-sponsors of the Open. Morrie.
Thank you, Bernie. For the last 40 years, we at Air New Zealand have taken our responsibilities as one of New Zealand's largest corporate entities seriously. We've always felt a sense of obligation to contribute towards New Zealand's sporting and cultural development. And we have great pleasure in continuing that tradition now.
It's gone. There's nothing that would take out all the onboard communication systems for this long and leave the aircraft still able to fly.
Upgrade to distress phase. When does the fuel run out?
9:30.
It was good.
Science is a breeze.
Oh, it's all right for you. You don't have to sit school seeing it tomorrow.
Down the study, Catherine, you'll be fine.
A nice early night.
Can't we stand and wait for Dean? Yay!
No, not tonight. You've got to be on your toes tomorrow, girl, at your very best. Hello, Maria Collins.
Yes, it's David Eden, Director of Flight Operations, Mrs. Collins. I'm just ringing to let you know that there's been a problem with Jim's flight.
Who's got the spoon?
Jim's been out of radio contact for some time now, since about 2 p.m. in fact.
Now, there could be any number of reasons for that, and we'll let you know as soon as we know any more. But if you're on your own, it
might be an idea if you get someone to come and sit with you.
Oh, just tell the truth.
It's a hoax. They wouldn't do that. They wouldn't. The police come round even for a road accident.
Mum, what's the matter? Mum?
Hello? It's Mrs. Casson here. My husband's first officer on Flight 901. I've just had a call from a Captain Eden saying that the aircraft is overdue. Could you confirm that?
New Zealand 901, Auckland on New Zealand 901, Christchurch control on 1260. 901, this is Vette 1260.
Mr. Davis.
DC-10 on a sightseeing flight over the Antarctic. Sources within Air New Zealand confirm that there has been no radio contact with the plane for some hours, and it's believed the plane will be out of fuel by 9:30 tonight. Air New Zealand says there was no immediate concern because there had been a solar flash.
Mr. Davis, we've just heard. Can we have a reaction?
Or electrical disturbance.
Get this bum out of here. How do you feel, sir?
How the hell do you think I feel?
Davis, out!
Now get out!
Mr. Davis!
Muslim students occupying the United States Embassy in...
Mr. Davis, it's the Prime Minister's office.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great regret that we must accept that the aircraft is overdue.
Come on, Craig.
Haven't you got something new?
The aircraft carries extensive life support equipment, so in the event of something like...
Antarctic, Craig.
Mr. Saxon,
Where's
where's the
Morrie
Chief Executive going to say something?
Mr. Davis has been down in Wellington. He's on his way here now. He'll be making a statement in the boardroom as soon as he arrives.
When did you back?
Morrie Davis.
Fuel reserves exhausted.
Cape Pallet, latitude 7220.
Check 7220.
Longitude 17013.
Check 17013.
McMurdo, latitude 7753.
Check 7753.
Longitude 16448.
Check. No, again.
16448.
16658.
It's more than 2 degrees difference.
It's nearly 30 miles.
Brian Hewitt, who is it?
Alan Dorday here, Mr. Hewitt, Flight Dispatch.
What do you want?
We've discovered a 2-degree error in 901's destination waypoint at McMurdo.
It's not 2 degrees. It's an update of 2.1 miles. We put it in last night. And it's no concern of Flight Dispatch anyway.
Is it true, Mr. Davis, that delegates to the 10th Antarctic Treaty meeting 6 weeks ago warned member governments to discourage sightseeing flights to the Antarctic because of the danger?
Are you saying they know more about flying than we do?
What's your reaction, Mr. Davis, to Air New Zealand's first loss of a commercial flight?
Well, that question makes me sick. We're terrified. These are the kind of circumstances that chill us all. It's appalling.
In news just to hand, Air New Zealand has announced that the wreckage of Flight 901 has been found on the flanks of Mount Erebus, a 13,000-foot volcano in Antarctica. The indications are that there are no survivors of the 257 passengers or crew. And just repeating that news, Air New Zealand has announced that the wreckage of Flight 901 has been found in Antarctica.
Seven people have died, but those figures alone do not indicate the depth of the tragedy for New Zealand. The ripples spread through a small society and touch almost everybody. There's an immediate tide of public sympathy for the bereaved, and also for the airline. After the first reaction of sympathy, there's another. How did it happen? Ron Chippendale, the Chief Inspector of Air Accidents, will be the first to answer that question. He will be assisted at the crash site by Air New Zealand's chief pilot, Ian Gemmell. Already in the navigation section of Air New Zealand, the question of cause is being addressed. Keith Ames is an authority on the sophisticated inertial navigation system that guides the DC-10. He's been unable to sleep since he was telephoned during the night. Ames calls up the flight plan for the previous week's flight and looks particularly for the McMurdo coordinates. From these figures, he plots the route taken by that flight down McMurdo Sound. He then calls up Collins' flight plan to compare it with the previous week's. His worst fears are confirmed. The destination coordinates are different. When he plots these coordinates, they take the route on a direct line over Mount Erebus.
Keith? Have you got a paper? Did you speak to Hewitt?
The error wasn't in 901's flight plan.
Eh?
The update on Jim's flight plan corrected an error. It's been in the computer for God knows how long.
I don't understand.
His flight plan was a route over Erebus to the tack end. Previous flights seem to have taken them straight down McMurdo Sound.
The hell? Which one was Jim Collins briefed on?
Still unanswered are questions as to how far and how quickly news of this discovery traveled.
There is no explanation as yet why TE 901 was found well below its designated minimum altitude. The wreckage was sighted at 2,500 feet. The minimum altitude prescribed in the briefing is 6,000 feet.
Mr. Davis, are you saying that the pilot had taken the plane too low?
I cannot comment further than that.
Do you think the compasses were thrown out of alignment by the magnetic fields of the South Pole?
You're talking about the old DC-3 days. The DC-10 is fitted with an inertial navigation system which is the most sophisticated on any commercial airliner operating in the world today.
No mention of the change coordinates.
And it will tell you within yards exactly where you are.
4 days after the disaster, the black box flight recorder and the cockpit voice recorder are recovered intact from the crash site. In the absence of witnesses, they will provide precious clues to the last moments of Flight 901. On the 4th of December, Chief Pilot Ian Gemmell returns to Air New Zealand headquarters with an eyewitness account of the crash site.
All 3 engines were still delivering considerable power at impact. The engines never broke away prior to impact, neither did the wings.
So it doesn't appear to have been caused by any major structural or engine failure?
No.
So the DC-10 is in the clear?
I think so.
What does the Chief Inspector think?
I briefed him before I left the ice. He agrees. At this stage.
It is not known whether the change coordinates are discussed at this meeting. But later that afternoon, Gemmell does discuss them with Air New Zealand's in-house Committee of Enquiry, which has been charged with putting together a file on Flight 901 for the Chief Inspector of Air Accidents. Gemmell then goes on to brief a team of 3 experts, which is to fly out to the United States that night to transcribe the cockpit voice tape. Although by this time, Gemmell, Eden and Johnson almost certainly know about the change of coordinates, that potentially vital information is not passed on to the transcribing team. The following day, the Chief Executive reports to the full board for the first time.
901 appears to have hit Mount Erebus at about 1,400 feet. That appears to be off course. Considerably. The aeroplane was apparently attempting to descend into clearer air, but was left of center. Collins was one of our most proficient commanders. I can't think why he got into this position.
Were all the navigational systems functional?
As far as we can tell, Des, yes.
Deputy Chairman Des Dalgetty.
Well, we must watch out for the post-mortem syndrome. Everything we say and do is under scrutiny. There'll be lawyers from the US and here looking for information, so we must protect ourselves.
Des has suggested Lloyd Brown QC and David Williams as counsel.
They're the best combination of heavyweights I can think of. They'll do the job.
Well, perhaps you could instruct them on our behalf.
I've taken the liberty of instructing them already, Bill, on behalf of the board. And I've advised the Prime Minister.
Again, there is no mention of the change coordinates.
Now then, when does the Chief Inspector visit us?
The conduct of the police team and the face rescue team is beyond praise. The conditions on the crash site were harrowing in the extreme.
Chief Inspector, I understand the skewer goals were...
Which I'm sure you people have the good taste not to want to delve into.
A rumour has it, Inspector, that the cause of the disaster is already known.
That's news to me.
Wasn't the pilot too low?
Nothing has been decided.
Mr. Chippendale, have you seen this? London Sunday Times says that the last 3 messages received from the plane overwhelmingly suggest that Captain Collins and his crew misjudged their position. Are you saying that's wrong?
I'm saying it's disappointing to see that kind of thing in print before the matter has been fully investigated.
Mr. Chippendale.
On the 13th of December, the Chief Inspector arrives at Air New Zealand headquarters to continue his inquiries. Chippendale's interviews of Air New Zealand's flight personnel and pilots will comprise the major part of his investigation. At the end of it, he will find no evidence to suggest the crew were misled by the change coordinates, and he will conclude that the change played no part in causing the disaster. Meanwhile, the board meets with Lloyd Brown and David Williams, counsel for Air New Zealand.
Here it is.
What exactly, Morrie?
It's the file for Chippendale.
A comprehensive file of papers and documents relating to the accident and other Antarctic flights was tabled by the Chief Executive.
Thank you, Des.
put together by our in-house inquiry.
We don't need that. We've got to be careful, Morrie.
That's right. We can't be sure at this stage what's discoverable or by whom.
That file should be noted or stamped in such a way as to carry their confidentiality to the company and to avoid court-ordered discovery. It is also vital that no conclusions be recorded in any reports.
We advised them not to do that.
Who?
The in-house committee. We told them not to reach any conclusions, just to prepare the file.
I see.
Bill, if any of this got to court, we can be ordered to make our reports and conclusions available to the opposition. And we'd be held to them.
As Christmas approaches, the chief executive is looking to Air New Zealand's future, trying to put the worst of the trauma behind his troubled company.
Yeah, all right, hang on.
But some of the line pilots are becoming alarmed at what they perceive to be management's push towards blaming Collins and his crew for the disaster.
Well, Maria.
Mr. Davis.
We haven't got too much between us, Maria, have we?
Haven't we?
I just wanted to say that I think you've all been terribly brave. I think you should know that. You've suffered personally, I know. But we're a corporate family. There is a need for all of us to put this terrible tragedy behind us. Accept it, but put it behind us. Share the responsibility of making the future a success.
Success.
You've all been brave. Keep it up.
Derby Field is parading in the bird. Please view the field and bid early. The coach is closing in 15 minutes time.
The toe, Peter?
Like one who loves the gains he has amassed and meets the hour when he must lose his loot. But first, the good oil.
Number 13 is paid $6.40. And number 6 is paid $1.08.
Take him, Lindsay.
$75 and $2.20. $6.40.
Your Honour? Mr. Brown?
Yes, how's tricks?
Bowling along. Bowling along. You ready for that job yet?
The time cometh, Lance. Just a few loose ends to tidy up first.
It'll keep. Whenever you're ready.
How's the lad? How do you think he'll go?
Well, he's a big-boned fella, you know. Slow developer. I think he'll be stronger in the spring.
Right. Well, thank you, Lance. Best keep our loot in our pockets, then.
All the best, Your Honour. When you want that job, just give me the number.
There's something so much more satisfying about loot gained through risk and sheer cunning.
One can feel a certain empathy with the criminal mind.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Robert Muldoon, will now make the presentation in front of the members' stand.
At odds like that, I wish I'd had the balance of payments deficit on your filly.
What's this job Lance kept offering you, Peter?
Oh, a certain literary endeavour Lance and I have been discussing for some years.
In February 1980, stories of the change coordinates begin to surface in the press.
Who's leaking this damn stuff?
It's got to have come from the pilots.
Well, it's got to be stopped, damn it. It's bloody disloyal.
Well, we'll look into it, Morrie.
What are we going to say?
Say nothing.
It's damaging, damn it. Something's got to be said. Examination of the computerized flight plan records and information made available from the aircraft's navigation computer equipment recovered from the site confirms that the correct coordinates were fed into the navigation system. That is all.
Wasn't it changed the night before, Mr. Davis?
Tell the board!
Was the crew told of the change, Mr. Davis?
What's your attitude towards a public inquiry?
Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I'd like to ask if there are
As the first numbing shock of the tragedy gives way to cooler assessments, lawyers acting for the estates of victims of the disaster gather in Auckland to listen to an American attorney.
I'd like now to introduce the man who fought the insurers in the Paris air crash and won, Jerry Stearns.
Meanwhile, Peter Mahon, who acts for the aviation insurance syndicates under the Lloyd's umbrella, has flown from London to meet with Air New Zealand.
There is a limit of $42,000 per passenger in terms of our liability. Unless it can be proved that your airline was grossly, willfully, recklessly negligent. I can assure you, Mr. Davis, that that is a tough standard of proof for any claimant to achieve.
The insurers are concealed behind the skirts of the airline, while the airline desperately tries to rebuild its morale and public image. The insurer's overriding consideration is the restriction of the eventual payout. Now, that, gentlemen, is the bottom line.
The question is, what happens if there is a public inquiry? How does that affect claims against us?
In theory, since neither the evidence nor the findings of a public inquiry are admissible in later litigation, it has no effect.
In theory?
But in practice, it can become a sort of test case, where they can throw mud and see which bits stick.
And then use those against us in court at a later date?
Precisely.
At the end of Jerry Stern's speech, the lawyers for the victims' estates vote to form a consortium to present a united front against the insurers.
Oh, one final word of warning, gentlemen. Air New Zealand may not be very experienced at this game, but it'll be getting a lot of advice from people who are. And Chippendale's report will have input, and strong input, from both Air New Zealand and your Civil Aviation Division. You cannot rely on it. You must press for an independent inquiry to determine cause.
In early March, Chippendale's draft report is released to those involved. It contains minor criticisms of Air New Zealand and civil aviation, but directs the major blame elsewhere.
Flying in cloud at 1,500 feet in mountainous terrain, rubbish.
I could understand it if Jim had done something minor, or forgotten to do something, sort of contributed. This is just stupid.
They must think we're flying Cessnas. I've seen Chippendale's final draft, Arthur, and I reckon it's just a company line. Pilot error.
What about the coordinates?
Chippendale said there was no evidence to suggest the pilot was misled by them.
Rubbish. They were briefed on the other route. We know that.
Yeah, well, look, Maria can make submissions to Chippendale before he does his final report, but I reckon he's a lost cause. Now, we've got to go to the top. The Pilots Association's got to put pressure on the Attorney General for a public inquiry.
But the Attorney General, Jim Macleay, is under pressure from many sides. He is invited to dinner at the Meridian Room of the South Pacific Hotel in Auckland. At dinner, Macleay is urged not to allow a public inquiry into the cause of the disaster. He is told that any public inquiry would do grave damage to the airline.
There's no option.
On the 10th of March, 4 months after the crash, the Attorney General announces there will be a public commission of inquiry.
Well, who's going to do the job?
I think it's a matter for a High Court judge, and I think he should sit alone. Because I doubt if we could find anyone with real aviation expertise who hasn't at some stage been involved with either Air New Zealand or civil aviation.
A bit risky, isn't it? Leaving it all in the hands of one man. We'd have to be very particular about just who that man is.
Oh, basta, Antonio. Grazie.
Prego, signori.
Ever thought of opening a restaurant, Lloyd?
Common fantasy of the middle classes who've never washed a dish in their lives. Can things be really that bad?
Not bad. A bit humdrum.
You need a change. Too much cops and robbers.
Margarita. Margarita.
Peter? Well, what is it?
Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen of New Zealand and her other realms and territories, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith. A warrant.
To our trusty and well-beloved, the Honourable Peter Thomas Mahon of Auckland, Judge of the High Court of New Zealand, greetings. It's Erebus. You're the Royal Commissioner.
Reposing trust and confidence in my integrity, knowledge, and ability.
Now, you said it could be a political football.
Nevertheless, I'm doing it.
Good.
The Chief Inspector of Air Accidents, Ron Chippendale, has just released his final report into the Erebus disaster. The chilling last seconds in the lives of 257 people who died in the Air New Zealand DC-10 crash in the Antarctic are now known. The pilot bringing his aircraft thousands of feet too low, ignoring the mounting alarm of his flight engineers, uncertain of his position as the aircraft neared the icy slopes. Alas, too late.
Much of the lasting bitterness of the Erebus aftermath can be traced to the government's decision to publish Chippendale's report before the public inquiry.
And it is my firm belief that had the pilot observed the minimum altitude of 16,000 feet until over McMurdo, as he had been clearly briefed to do, then descended to a minimum altitude of 6,000 feet in the safety sector around McMurdo, the DC-10 would not have hit Erebus.
Chippendale makes only minor criticisms of Air New Zealand and civil aviation. It is a highly satisfactory result for the Prime Minister, who, as Minister of Finance, is the chief shareholder in Air New Zealand. But publication of the report is a huge obstacle to the subsequent Royal Commission. Those who feel they've already been tried and cleared by the Chief Inspector do not welcome being tried again. While for those whose loved ones have been held culpable for the deaths of 257 people, the rebuttal of the report after such massive publicity seems a hopeless task.
The damage has been done, Mr. Davison. I don't see much point in carrying on. Maybe in time, everyone will forget.
Mrs. Collins, I know you're disappointed. But Mahon is a judge with a reputation for cutting through to the truth. Give him a chance.
And finally, Your Honor, it's my submission that Your Honor might well consider the principle of omnia praise munter.
Omnia praise?
The law will presume to
be done that which has to be done by someone with a statutory duty to do it?
That's the one, Your Honor.
If I remember correctly, Mr. Harrison, you have tried once before to lead me down this particular garden path.
Yes, Your Honor.
And how did I receive your omnia praise submission on that occasion? Do you recall?
You were not particularly impressed with it, sir, as I recall.
Nor am I on this occasion, Mr. Harrison. Appeal dismissed.
Silence. Stand up, please.
Mr. Harrison.
Your Honor?
Might I see you in chambers before you go?
Go on in, Mr. Harrison.
I won't be needing this for a while. Sit down, Gary. Now, as you may know, I have been appointed Royal Commissioner for the Erebus Inquiry.
Yes, sir. Congratulations.
Thank you. David Barraguaneth will be senior counsel assisting me. I was wondering whether you might like to join us.
I'd be delighted, sir.
Good. Good. It's hardly the sort of case for your omnia praise munter rita es acta, Gary, but it should be interesting, nevertheless.
Monday, the 7th of July, 1980. The Royal Commission into the Erebus disaster begins. Many see the commission as a formality, expecting Chippendale's report to be confirmed. That view seems to be shared by the government, which has given Mahon just 3 months to hear the witnesses and write his report.
Silence. Stand up, please.
Mahon, with a reputation for brevity and incisiveness, will seek 3 extensions of time hear over 50 witnesses, and sift through 3,000 pages of evidence and nearly 300 exhibits before the inquiry will have run its course.
Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. I think it would be appropriate, given what we're here for, to observe 1 minute's silence for 257 people who died, most tragically, barely 9 months ago.
The hearings and their aftermath will provide their own victims. The Royal Commissioner will be among them.
Do you swear that the evidence you give...
The Chief Inspector of Air Accidents will stand in the witness box before Mahon for 8 days without flagging. His opinion will not change.
Chief Inspector, would you agree that had Air New Zealand's instructions to the pilot in respect of minimum safe altitude and the descent in the safety sector been observed, this accident would not have happened?
That is my belief.
You made an allegation that Air New Zealand was in breach of Civil Aviation Regulation 77. Now, that regulation requires, does it not, that the pilot in command has demonstrated to the airline that he has an adequate knowledge of certain matters?
Correct.
In what way do you suggest the crew should have demonstrated their adequate knowledge, other than by undergoing the required briefing?
In some tangible form, perhaps a question and answer paper.
How about a statutory declaration by each crew member that he had an adequate knowledge of the various items?
I don't see that that would suit the purpose.
So you prefer the question and answer?
Yes, I do.
And I remind you that we're dealing with professional pilots.
Yes.
Do you know of any airline which conducts a quiz session at the end of a briefing?
I have not attended any such.
Isn't the answer that you do not?
To his knowledge, that is surely sufficient to answer your question.
I have no wish to harp, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. McLaren.
Mr. Chippendale, earlier this year, did you send to my client, Mrs. Casson, the widow of the first officer on 901, a copy of your draft report?
I did.
And did she then ring you and indicate to you that she desired to clear her husband's name as a pilot?
That is correct.
And you will no doubt accept that that still remains her predominant concern?
I would.
You have said in your report that on 901's approach to the Erebus area, the surface visibility was good. Surface definition poor and horizon definition poor, with mountaintops covered in cloud. Is that a fair summary?
I believe so.
And in these circumstances, to use your own words, a high potential for whiteout exists.
That is as I understand it.
And the hazardous nature of whiteout when flying is, first, a loss of horizon perception.
That is one of the effects.
Secondly, disorientation and loss of references.
Yes.
Thirdly, a loss of distance perception.
Yes.
Fourthly, a loss of height perception.
That is so.
You've told us that the crew's demeanor was calm and confident up until seconds before the collision.
That is my impression.
And it is quite apparent, is it not, that nobody on the flight deck saw the mountain, subject to the 6.5 seconds warning from the ground proximity warning system.
I could detect no indication that they had sighted an obstruction.
Would I be right in suggesting that, although you have indicated a probable cause of this accident, that that is not necessarily the only probable cause?
This is correct.
You would agree that an equally probable cause was the failure to brief the crew in a detailed fashion on whiteout, particularly as it could occur at low altitudes?
This, I believe, may be a causal factor. The probable cause is the last event which happened in the sequence of the flight, which made the accident inevitable.
So the probable cause is the end event in a chain of prior events?
This is the case.
I take it that you're really saying that the probable cause is your definition of the immediate cause of what happened.
This is so.
There may have been, as I understand your view, some contributing causes which preceded the immediate cause.
This is correct.
I see.
You mentioned in your report a helicopter pilot. He was flying over the slopes of Mount Erebus, correct me if I'm wrong, about 15 minutes after the accident time.
That is correct.
Those men who crewed that helicopter knew that if they looked to the south, there was Mount Erebus, didn't they? They knew that because they knew the locality in which they were placed.
That is so. They were very familiar with the area.
And despite being so familiar with the area, they were unable to see the elevated ground to the south, were they?
I believe that that was the case.
They were looking at something they knew was there, but they still couldn't see it.
That is so.
The cockpit voice recorder contains nothing which would suggest that the crew of Flight 901 ever did in fact see the slope, does it?
I don't believe so.
Now, my learned friend, Mr. McLaren, spoke to you about weather conditions on the approach to Erebus at the time. And you agree that a high potential for whiteout existed.
Yes.
So if you put those two together, the weather conditions at the time and the cockpit voice recorder, which indicates the crew didn't see the slope, are you not driven to the conclusion that the whiteout deception occurred?
I believe so.
Well, Mr. Chippendale, if Captain Collins and his crew are flying visually, then they're relying upon the direct information they get through their eyes, aren't they?
I think they...
Is that right?
I don't see that a one-word answer is going to fix that.
I think, Mr. Davison, we will give Mr. Chippendale the lunch and the German to think about it.
Don't shoot your bolt, lad. There's a way to go yet. What are you on to this afternoon?
Cockpit voice recorder.
Yes, good stuff, no doubt. I'd get him onto his last cause weakness, and whiteout. You know, he appreciates as a purely technical matter what whiteout is, but he still thinks they should have seen the mountain. The man clearly lacks imagination.
You say in your report, the probable cause of this accident was the decision of the captain to continue the flight at low level towards an area of poor surface and horizon definition. Now, just pausing there for a moment. Before the captain or any person can make a decision to continue, do they not have to know that ahead of them is an area of poor surface and horizon definition? Is that not logical? Putting it to you another way, perhaps. How can you make a decision upon something you don't know about?
A decision is perhaps an ambiguously worded. The cause to which I was referring was that of the captain to continue flight at low level.
If you look at the transcript of the cockpit voice recorder, Collins says, actually, those conditions don't look very good at all, do they? He then becomes apprehensive of the conditions ahead of him. He doesn't decide to continue on. He decides 44 seconds later to climb out of it. So where do you say that the captain decided to continue the flight at low level towards an area of poor surface and horizon definition?
Well, he is already at 2,000 feet and decides to descend a further 500 feet.
Was he at that stage aware that there was an area of poor surface and horizon definition ahead of him? You see, he didn't see the mountains. You've already agreed.
This is just the point. He didn't see anything. He went down a further 500 feet to see something, and I don't believe we will ever know whether, in fact, he comprehended that the area ahead of him was one of poor definition or believed it to be a continuation of the cloud base.
I suggest to you, Mr. Chippendale, that your probable cause just doesn't hold up at all. The captain was aware of the poor conditions ahead of him only 44 seconds before he decided to climb out. And so instead of deciding to continue, as you suggest, he decided the exact opposite. He decided, in fact, to climb the aircraft out of the situation.
I believe that my probable cause, as it stands, is reasonable.
Your probable cause requires, though, that the pilot perceived in front of him an area of poor surface or horizon definition in order to give him the sort of knowledge that avoidance action needed to be taken.
It is my belief he was confronted with such an area as I have just stated.
But he needed to perceive it as such in order to decide whether or not to take evasive action, didn't he?
If he was not immediately reassured by very clear perception of the terrain about him, he should have immediately vacated the area.
I understood there was no indication from the pilot or the co-pilot on the cockpit voice recorder of not knowing where they were.
The whole decision to switch the aircraft back to its computerized flight track after the descent indicates they didn't know where they were, because that computerized track was taking them straight towards Mount Erebus. At 26 miles north of McMurdo, had he known where he was, and had the navigation system been accurate, that would have put him almost into the side of the mountain. And he should have taken evasive action long before.
You were saying he did not know where he was?
Correct.
You don't suggest, I assume, that Captain Collins would deliberately fly at 2,000 feet towards a mountain range of 10 or 12,000 feet?
Correct.
The Chief Inspector's report seemed to stand up reasonably well under cross-examination, despite his appalling practice of not requiring written, signed statements from the people he interviewed. Davison attacked him on what appeared to be his weakest point, his criticism of the pilot for not actually seeing an optical illusion. Chippendale's intransigence on Collins' inability to see optical illusions seems to beg larger questions. What was Collins doing at 1,500 feet if the minimum altitude for that side of the mountain was 16,000 feet? And why did Collins and his crew, flying one of the most sophisticated aircraft ever built, seem not to know where they were?
Peter? Peter?
Das Turtle Casper.
What did he do to get you up so early?
I spied him lurking in the Kowai, looking lasciviously at the Tui. I have explained to this fellow many, many times that I have no objection whatever to your pursuit of the sparrow, the blackbird, the starling, or even the odd thrush. But I will not brook your attempts to throttle a song in that Tui.
That fellow is a cat, Peter. Besides, you can't see the koi from the bedroom.
It's the thrill of the chase.
Oh.
I couldn't sleep.
9 months after the Erebus tragedy, the Civil Aviation Division of the Ministry of Transport begins its evidence. Civil aviation is the government agency responsible for regulating Air New Zealand's operations. And it is the relationship between civil aviation and Air New Zealand which will intrigue the Commission.
Are we ready to go?
Just a moment, we will be.
Whereas Air New Zealand is protected by a $42,000 liability limit per passenger unless grossly negligent, civil aviation's liability is unlimited on any standard of negligence. This liability is of particular interest to John Henry and Colin Nicholson, counsel for the Consortium of Victims' Estates.
Every expert we've spoken to, Air Force, Navy or civilian, is flabbergasted when we tell them Air New Zealand was sending pilots to the Antarctica who'd never flown down there before.
Right. Well, that's where we start. Why did civil aviation allow Air New Zealand to do that?
Silence. Stand up, please.
If Henry and Nicholson can find a chink in civil aviation's armor, the estates of those who perished on Erebus might benefit immeasurably.
Mr. Morris.
Thank you, Your Honor. I call Eric James Ormondson, control of airline operations.
Mr. Ormondson, there was a requirement that a pilot in command should first have a flight under supervision down to the Antarctic. What was the reason for that requirement?
The reason was so the pilot could become familiar with the operation.
Did you regard it as a prudent requirement in 1978?
I regarded it as a valuable experience.
And a prudent requirement?
Yes, it would be a prudent requirement.
Meaning it was necessary for 78?
Desirable.
Is it not desirable then for 1979?
Yes, it would be desirable.
Prudent?
Yes, I must agree it would be prudent. But I wouldn't agree because it was not required in 1979 that it was imprudent.
If it was prudent in 79, why delete it?
Because the company said they could not comply with it in 1979.
Well, what was the reason Air New Zealand gave you to establish that they could not comply with the requirement in 1979?
I don't recall they gave a reason.
Is the situation that Air New Zealand's proposal would be treated by you as being satisfactory merely because it's put forward?
You made that statement. I wouldn't agree with it.
Now, civil aviation is also responsible for approving Air New Zealand's briefing material. Can you indicate any document in this briefing material which gives the pilot adequate knowledge of the dangers of whiteout?
No, I can't.
So you still hold to the view that nothing more than is recorded in the briefing material is desirable for pilots flying into the Antarctic?
No, I couldn't make that statement.
Now, what information is there now available, Mr. Amundsen, which was not available to your division prior to the 79 flights?
Well, the information that's been presented here on the phenomenon of whiteout.
The material on whiteout would clearly be available to civil aviation from the New Zealand Meteorological Services, would it not? Are you aware of any inquiry that civil aviation made to them for further information on this topic?
Other than my own inquiries, no.
Am I right in thinking the Meteorological Service is a part of the Ministry of Transport?
It is.
And civil aviation is also part of the Ministry of Transport, isn't it?
It is.
And it is quite clear, therefore, that the information was available to your division, wasn't it?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Amundsen. No further questions.
About the selection of the route, Mr. Amundsen. Suppose you had got in touch with the US Air Traffic Control Commander at McMurdo and said it is proposed to fly in DC-10 aircraft at the same altitude as your military aircraft. But whereas your aircraft approach from the northwest, ours will approach from the north. And whereas your aircraft will be permanently on your radar screen for 40 miles out, ours are going to disappear behind the mountain 40 miles out. In addition, your VHF radio contact with our aircraft will also disappear at 40 miles out. What view do you think the officer in charge of the US Navy at McMurdo would have taken of such a proposal?
I believe the US Navy would be aware of the situation.
That means, does it not, that if the air traffic controller at McMurdo had a US Navy starlifter approaching from the northwest somewhat in front of the arrival of an Air New Zealand DC-10, both are traveling at 16,000 feet and converging, are they not?
Yes, they would be converging.
Then would the air traffic controller not have to say to the starlifter, you are on a converging course with an aircraft which I cannot get on my radar screen and cannot speak to on VHF radio? What would you think of such a proposal if you were the US Navy commander?
Captain Spence, you were responsible in civil aviation for monitoring the Antarctic operation. Now, when Air New Zealand came up with this direct route over Erebus, did it not occur to you to suggest that matters would be safer if the route were moved 20 miles or so further west to McMurdo Sound, to follow the safer military route?
If the company can prove to us that there's adequate terrain clearance on the route, I have very little choice over which route it wishes to fly.
Did you not wonder why Air New Zealand had seen fit to depart from the military route down McMurdo Sound?
I did not query this.
I'm trying to find some reason, Captain, for civil aviation's failure to suggest to Air New Zealand that they shift the route a bit further west, to follow the military route down the Sound.
Captain Spence, do you really think it possible that Captain Collins flew at 1,500 feet, 26 miles out from McMurdo, knowing Erebus was directly in front of him?
Captain Collins should never have been at 1,500 feet.
Just answer my question. Do you think it possible that he would have flown at 1,500 feet, 26 miles out from McMurdo when he knew Erebus was directly in front of him?
I don't know what was in Captain Collins's mind at that time. I know that the aircraft should not have been in that position at that height. This we do know.
The nature of the relationship between Air New Zealand and civil aviation intrigues Mahon, and he feels compelled to raise his suspicions with the director of the division.
Captain Kippenberger, has there been any measure of consultation between you and Air New Zealand about a combined approach to the Commission in the matter of evidence and probable cause?
So far as I'm concerned, and as far as I know, no.
It has not been suggested between the division and the company that the safe thing to do will be to put the whole blame on Captain Collins?
No, it certainly has not.
I'm just exploring the possibility as a matter of tactics that the airline and your division of the ministry may have thought it desirable to emphasize more than anything else that pilot error was the cause of the accident. But to your knowledge, it is not so.
I can assure you, it is not so.
Thank you, Captain Kippenberger. You may step down.
Mahon is later to conclude that civil aviation's approval of a flight path over Mount Erebus could not be justified under any circumstances.
Silence. Stand up, please.
He also concludes that civil aviation should not have agreed to the withdrawal of the requirement that all pilots to the Antarctic should have undertaken previous supervised flight to that region.
The Erebus Commission has today heard a...
Mr. Brown!
Capt. Richard?
Sir, I've been going through the Chief Navigator's evidence. I think you better come yourself and hear what he has to say.
Brian Hewitt, the Chief Navigator, is to become the first victim of the Erebus hearings. He will provide Mahon with the most important clue as to what was in Captain Collins' mind as he approached the mountain.
So until 1978, the route's down here, over Erebus, to the radio beacon, the NDB. In 1978, though, it's decided to computerize the flight plan. Mistake number one. Mr. Hewitt enters the coordinates for the ice runway here instead of the radio beacon. But that's not so bad because the difference is minor. The real mistake is that when he punches the coordinates into the computer, he hits the wrong key. 16648 became 16448.
And that sent the route where?
These mistakes lie in the computer for 14 months.
14 months?
A couple of weeks before Collins takes off, the Captain Simpson flies down there. He seems to be the only pilot who plotted the actual destination waypoint.
16448.
It wasn't the position he had been expecting.
What position was that?
The TACAN.
What?
The radio beacon had been withdrawn by then, so the only ground navigational aid was here, the Tactical Air Navigation Aid.
Or TACAN.
And why would Simpson have been expecting that?
It's customary to plan a flight track to the nearest ground navigational aid.
When Simpson gets back to Auckland, he tells Ross Johnson that there's something wrong with the McMurdo destination waypoint and that it would be better positioned over here at the TACAN. Johnson tells Lawton of nav section...
And Lawton told me. When I checked the route, I had no idea that it was way over here. And I had no idea that I'd punched the 4 instead of the 6. So that when I did the update, I thought I was just correcting my first mistake and shifting the track from here to here. 2.1 nautical miles.
In fact, we're shifting it from here to here.
27 nautical miles.
Mr. Hewitt, you say whilst typing information from the worksheet into the computer, you inadvertently typed the longitude at McMurdo as 164 degrees 48 east rather than 166 degrees 48 east.
That is correct.
We are told that in aviation navigation there is a principle of check, cross-check and recheck. On the process that you've described, what was your check as to the accuracy of the information you'd inserted?
The visual check.
What was your cross-check?
I called the flight plan up and had a look at that.
Your recheck?
I did not do a recheck.
Your Honour, could Exhibit 47 NXG of Mr. Chippendale's report be shown to the witness? Now, that map shows that the route goes to the west of Mount Erebus and not over the top, doesn't it?
But this chart was produced for publicity purposes and not as an operational document. It's artist's license.
Well, then I take it that you'd be surprised if that was given to the aircrew in the course of their pre-flight briefing.
I would be very surprised, sir.
You say the publicity department prepared this?
Yes.
From what material?
The information we gave them.
Annex H. Do you know who prepared that map?
Again, it's the publicity department.
Prepared on the basis of information supplied by the navigation section?
Yes, sir.
This map also shows an incorrect track down McMurdo Sound?
Yes, sir.
And would you be surprised if that map was shown to flight crews as part of their pre-qualification briefing?
Very surprised, sir.
Because it is, of course, quite misleading as to the official track.
Yes, sir.
Annex I, the strip chart. The tracks there go to the west of Erebus, don't they?
Yes, sir.
And that is the military route down McMurdo Sound, is it not?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Hewitt. No further questions.
Of the maps and charts allegedly given to the crews at their briefings, only one shows the official track over Erebus.
Mr. Davison.
Annex J for Mr. Hewitt, please.
And only one. This jet navigation chart was given by Air New Zealand to Ron Chippendale, the Chief Inspector of Air Accidents. It appears in his report as Annex J.
You've told us this document was prepared prior to the first flights in 1977.
Yes, sir. A copy was available in the briefing envelope that went on the first flight and was returned to the navigation section after each flight.
I would like you to look at this document.
Although Hewitt admits responsibility for the original mistake, neither he nor Air New Zealand Council is prepared for what follows.
Now, it's not the same as Annex J, is it, Mr. Hewitt? I suggest to you that that line, that track on the new map between Cape Hellett and McMurdo Sound indicates that somebody has drawn a track down McMurdo Sound to the position situated at 164 degrees, 48 minutes east. Would it surprise you to learn that this exhibit was attached to the briefing material handed out to every pilot in connection with the 1978 flights?
It would surprise me greatly.
Let's recap. In September of 78, you make an error in selecting a position of 164 degrees 48 minutes. And then from the first briefing after that, an entirely different track and distance diagram with your mistaken coordinates on it appears and forms the basis of the pilot's briefing. Don't you think that's an unusual coincidence?
It is.
So the question arises, Mr. Hewitt, as to whether the 164 degrees 48 minutes was a mistake in the first place. In other words, was it intended to have a flight track as shown on this exhibit? But in any event, taking a rather lesser view of the matter than Mr. Davison's putting to you, does this exhibit show near enough a track running down to the coordinates that you have told us are not correct? Those are the matters to be considered.
You should have given us notice you were going to produce that document.
So you did know about it?
We were going to produce it ourselves.
You didn't give us notice you were going to produce it?
Lawton was going to produce it as part of his evidence.
Why didn't they give that map to Chippendale then? Why'd they only give him Annex J, showing the track over Mount Erebus?
And why did your executive mates tell Chippendale Annex J was used in the briefing when it wasn't, and not tell them about this map, which was used?
We don't accept that.
Mr. Hewitt, just looking now at the chain of circumstances which appear to have been the result of the navigation section's involvement in these flights, I suggest to you the first error was when you selected the wrong coordinates when you programmed the computers in September 1978. Do you agree that was an error or an omission?
A minor inaccuracy.
Secondly, you have told us you inadvertently pushed the wrong key. Do you agree that was an error or omission?
That was an error.
Thirdly, when Mr. Brown was given the job of inserting those... Fourthly, if it in fact be established that Mr. Lawton be the man who... If it be proved that Exhibit 16 failure by your section to pick up that the error in the McMurdo position, when you visually checked what you put in, you omitted to pick up the difference between what was in front of you and what was on... Failure to insert the appropriate computer trigger. Captain Johnson was told by Captain Simpson that the difference between the failure of the pre-flight dispatch officer to advise Captain Collins... Then Captain Johnson's report to you of a 2.1 nautical mile change would be an error or omission?
Yes.
That is number 10. Can you think of any other errors or omissions we should add to the list before going any further?
No, I can't.
All these errors. And in a company, which in its navigation section tells us we are dealing with people who check and cross-check and recheck and never assume anything. It's a woeful story, isn't it?
It is not a good story.
I suggest to you, for people whose job it is to be precise, it is a woeful story.
That is your opinion, sir.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Hewitt. You may step down. Gentlemen and ladies, although in the strictest sense of the word, this is not a courtroom, nevertheless, I would ask you to respect it as such. I think we can leave it there for today.
Silence. Stand up, please.
Query. Can the navigation section of an airline which has won numerous international awards for safety and efficiency possibly have made that many mistakes?
Rhetorical, I think.
Ah, but Elspeth, you did not have the doubtful privilege of hearing the evidence. Exhibit 164, insofar as it shows a track plotted down the Sound to Hewitt's mistaken coordinates, a route which seems to be a natural extension of the safe military route. And insofar as it appeared in the pilot's briefing material at the same time as Hewitt's mistake, suggests that the track down the Sound was deliberate, not a mistake. And if Flight Dispatch did not tell Collins of the change in the destination waypoint, where did Collins understand the plane's computerized flight track was taking him? What did the man see? What was he expecting to see?
Yes. This is getting stupid. The company's making a public idiot of itself.
Yeah, that's not our concern.
We've still got to work for them.
I suppose at the end of the day we shall hear another raft of quotes from Davison and Nicholson and McLaren.
Well, if you opened your trap, Lloyd, I'd quote you too.
Excuse me. Morning. Good morning.
Peter Grundy, the flight operations manager, is Air New Zealand's first executive witness.
The whole truth and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Captain Grundy, did you understand that the minimum altitude at which Air New Zealand aircraft were permitted to fly in the Antarctic was 6,000 feet?
I did.
Have you heard from Air New Zealand employees any suggestions that the aircraft may have been flying below 6,000 feet?
I have not.
I'd like you to look at this newspaper article. The 8 o'clock of Saturday, 22nd October, 1977. It refers to a flight on a morning that week. Now, perhaps if I read this and you check that it's correct. Peter Mulgrew is ecstatic and elated by the breathtaking panorama of the world's most alien territory. He points out landmarks he's come to know so well.
Have you seen it?
At the controls, Captain Hawkins brings the DC-10 down to 200 meters over Scott and McMurdo bases, well below the towering volcano Erebus, belching smoke only 40 kilometers away. Did such a report come to your attention at any stage?
It did not.
If it had, would it have caused you concern?
Yes, it would have, as it was a breach of the minimum altitude laid down.
And nobody brought this article to your attention?
They did not. It's the first time I've seen it.
This is a trade magazine called Travelling Times, published in September '78.
Yes.
As we neared the Ross Ice Shelf, Captain Vette began a gradual descent which would bring us to approximately 3,000 feet above the ice. Now that indicates, does it not, that the aircraft went below 6,000 feet?
It does.
Was that article ever drawn to your attention?
This is the first time I've seen it.
The Central Leader, published on the 28th of November 1978. I quote, "We seem almost to hang over frozen land, and at 2,000 feet, we are low enough to see Hudson vehicles clearly." Was that article ever drawn to your attention?
It was not.
The Western Leader, November 1978. Was that article ever drawn to your attention?
It was not.
Thank you, Captain Grundy.
Mr. Davison.
Keesing was on that flight.
Who's Keesing?
Doug Keesing. He was the director of flight operations in 1978.
Mr. Davison.
Captain Grundy, as at the 7th of November 1978, did Captain Keesing hold the position in Air New Zealand of Flight Operations Director?
He did.
And as such, he was the senior officer within the company having responsibility for flight operations.
He was.
Were you aware that Captain Keesing was on Captain McWilliams' flight, which descended to a level of 2,000 feet?
I was aware quite some time afterwards that he was on that flight.
When exactly?
I cannot recall exactly.
If it were established that Captain Keesing well knew that the aircraft in which he had travelled had descended to a level of 2,000 feet, would you expect him, as Flight Operations Director, to have taken some steps to have ensured such descent did not recur on further flights, if, in fact, 6,000 feet was a minimum flight level?
I would expect him to raise the matter, yes.
To your knowledge, did he ever raise it with you?
Not with me.
With any other person?
Not to my knowledge.
Captain Grundy, do you know why it was that on the fatal flight, and not on other flights, that 6,000 feet was a minimum safe altitude?
I do not, sir.
What about Grundy's see nothing, hear nothing on the low flights?
Oh, I'd give him a 5.
Oh, 6. It's worth at least that.
8, a definite 8.
Surely if Morrie Davis knew what was going on down here, he'd put a stop to it.
Somebody must be reporting to him.
We should talk to him. Tell him what's really going on.
Let's see what briefing says. That's the guts of it.
There was, to my recollection...
The first briefing officer to give evidence is Anthony Lawson.
Captain Lawson, did you have knowledge of Antarctic flights descending below 6,000 feet before the accident occurred on the 28th of November, 1979?
No, I do recall media comment prior to that period, yes.
You do recall media comment prior to that period?
Yes.
Did you not think it a matter you should take up with the company, seeing you're involved with the qualifications of pilots on those routes?
I believe at that time I had no responsibility in that direction. At the time, I was a line captain DC-10.
So you didn't think it within your province to mention it to someone in authority in the company?
I'd expect that ample evidence would have been available to those in such a position to take whatever action they desired.
Particularly what are you referring to when you say there would be ample evidence to those in authority?
I can recall a TV news item, and I believe that other means that came to my attention were some articles in the staff news.
Lawson is the only Air New Zealand executive who admits any knowledge of the contents of the Airline newsletter. But less than 24 hours later, after an overnight adjournment, he changes his mind.
It says here, as the DC-10 cruised at 2,000 feet past Mount Erebus. That would convey to me that the aircraft passed over Mount Erebus at 2,000 feet.
Mr. Lawson, are you now telling the Commission that the article simply talks about overflying Erebus at 2,000 feet?
This article could certainly be read that way.
What? I'm not asking you how it could be read, but how you read it at the time.
I must have interpreted it that way, because it drew no undue concern from myself.
Mr. Lawson. take the single phrase, as the DC-10 cruised at 2,000 feet. What would that signify to your mind?
I would have to read it in conjunction with the rest of the sentence, Your Honor.
I'm asking you to read it not in conjunction. What would that single phrase signify to you?
The aircraft had 2,000 feet clearance from whatever it was following, sir.
Now, what about the phrase, past Mount Erebus?
I would assume, from my viewpoint, Your Honor, it would have reference to a vertical separation.
So in your view, then, the phrase, as the DC-10 cruised at 2,000 feet past Mount Erebus, properly translated means as the DC-10 cruised at 16,000 feet over Mount Erebus.
I would have to assume that, sir.
Now that you have refreshed your mind as to what happened yesterday, was it not your own view when you first read the airline newsletter that it referred to flights below 6,000 feet?
As I think I tried to explain in my initial reading of this article, I conveyed the impression earlier that I did not consider it of great consequence at that time.
The reason you gave yesterday for the lack of concern was that at that time you had no responsibility in that direction, that you were a line captain DC-10. That's the reason you gave yesterday.
Yes.
Wasn't the short point that you realized there was low flying below 6,000 feet? But you were no longer concerned with briefing. You were just a line captain DC-10. And those in authority would have known full well what was going on. Isn't that what you told us?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Mahon is left wondering what might have led this intelligent witness to contradict and embarrass himself.
As Airline Pilots Association reps, naturally we're concerned that the pilots get a fair hearing. But we also feel a responsibility towards the company.
Good, and it's good.
Thank you, Arthur.
Well, we feel the company's getting increasingly isolated.
Well, we appreciate you coming to see us.
You see, it's very difficult for someone in your position, with all due respect, to see the larger picture.
It's the picture the public's getting that we're concerned about.
Don't you worry about our public image. We employ specialists to take care of that.
Have any of them been down to the hearings lately? Because the company line is being met with open disbelief.
Now, just tie-ho there a minute, Arthur. As I understand it, you guys have pulled a couple of red herrings across the judge's eyes. Well, it's early days and he's no fool. There's a larger game being played out here with larger stakes than you people seem to realize. Now, if you guys would just settle down...
Look, we just came in here to tell you...
I asked you to talk with us from the very beginning and you refused. Isn't that right, Dave?
Dead right.
Now, Arthur, Peter, we're a company which puts enormous emphasis on pride and loyalty. You should know that. We want to get to the bottom of this thing, too. But I am telling you that there are factors in this thing that you, as pilots, know nothing about.
Mrs. Mahon?
Oh, hello, Mrs. Adams. How are you?
I've been at the hearings. Every day I haven't missed a session.
Oh, and are you finding them interesting?
It's terribly frustrating. I feel like standing up and shouting what you take us for, fools. I mean, all those people dead.
Well, what'd you make of that?
Who was he talking about, these larger forces?
I know. Thought he might have meant the insurers. I got a strong feeling it was the government.
Mother?
Now, you remember Mrs. Adamson?
I see her every day at the hearings.
Yes, well, she's taken an interest. Not much else to keep her occupied.
That's nice.
She is not a woman given to emotional outbursts.
She has certainly conducted herself with the utmost decorum.
Oh, Peter, it's like getting blood out of a stone. She says they're telling you lies.
That's possible.
Yes, but the inference is that you're being taken in by them.
It's the old story, Margarita. What seems to be a lie one day may very well turn out to be the truth the next. One is obliged to listen to all the evidence.
Do you know, that's what I told Mrs. Adamson.
Good. Good.
The second briefing officer to give evidence is Captain John Wilson. On the 9th of November, 19 days before takeoff, he briefed Collins and his crew on the flight south. At the very end of his evidence, after seeming to confirm the Air New Zealand position that aircraft were not to descend below 6,000 feet, Wilson makes a startling admission.
However, in 1978, I had become aware by overhearing comments that certain flights had gone below 6,000 feet. Up until March the 14th, 1979, I was located in the 17th floor of the Air New Zealand House within the Flight Operations Division, and it was in Air New Zealand House that I overheard these comments. These reports did not give me concern, as it was my belief that air traffic control at McMurdo retained the ability to give consent to descend lower than 6,000 feet. I remember remarking in passing at some of my Antarctic briefings that I was aware that certain flights had been below 6,000 feet. When I made this comment to crews, it was not with any tone of criticism, but for the reason I have just given, mainly that I assumed that it had been done with the prior authority of the air traffic control at McMurdo.
This statement from the briefing supervisor seems to strike at the foundations of Air New Zealand's position on low flying.
Did you tell Mr. Chippendale that you had discussed with other crews descents below 6,000 feet and not criticized such action?
No, I did not.
Did you tell Mr. Chippendale that it was your understanding that the aircrew on Antarctic flights could negotiate descents below 6,000 feet with the local air traffic control?
I don't believe I did.
Then why did you not tell Mr. Chippendale what you've just told this commission?
I don't follow what your line of question is there. I can't relate your question to what Mr. Chippendale had asked me.
The issue of flight below 6,000 feet was an important issue during the course of the accident investigation and the course of this inquiry.
Well, coming below 6,000 feet, in my experience as a practicing pilot, is no hazard in visual conditions.
But you didn't tell Mr. Chippendale that you had mentioned this to other crews when briefing them?
No.
Did it seem to be quite common knowledge that flights were descending below 6,000 feet?
I don't know if you would have said it was common knowledge. I had heard.
And on more than one occasion?
Yes.
Was it your impression that aircraft were permitted to descend below 16,000 feet in any area outside that safety sector?
I'd interpreted that sector as being for a general instrument letdown, and that in strictly visual conditions, and providing the captain had received permission from McMurdo ATC, he could have descended outside that sector.
Now, did you state that to the pilots at the Collins briefing?
No, there was no discussion on that.
At the Collins briefing, were the crews shown any chart on which the actual track over Mount Erebus was drawn?
No.
Did you indicate by pencil or otherwise the actual track?
I did.
And you made it specifically clear that the track took the aircraft in the vicinity of the summit of Mount Erebus?
I did.
Captain Wilson, were you aware at the time of the briefing that pilots were not obliged to follow that track over Mount Erebus?
Yes.
But if you knew that, why did you tell them they would be flying over Mount Erebus?
I was following the prepared script where it says so.
I suggest to you, Captain Wilson, that in the written briefing material, that is the prepared script you say you were following, there is in fact not a single written word to indicate the flight will be taking you over Mount Erebus.
But that was made clear in my remarks.
Just answer yes or no.
There is no specific written word.
There were in fact two crews at the briefing you conducted, weren't there, Captain Wilson?
Yes.
Collins and his crew are dead. But of those still living, we have Captain Gabriel, First Officer Irvine, and their commander, Captain Simpson. And I think you will recognise them there at the back of the room. Do you see them?
Yes, I see them.
And so, apart from yourself, the other 3 living persons who are in a position to assist the Commission as to what was discussed verbally at your briefing are Messrs. Gabriel, Simpson and Irvine. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it fair to say, Captain, that you are simply not equipped to brief crews for a low-level scenic flight without having been there before?
That would be correct.
You have told Council that you made earlier requests to go down to the Antarctic. Did you emphasize the points that we've just discussed, that you could hardly brief people on a scenic flight at low level when you hadn't been there yourself? It would be a little like the blind leading the blind, would it not?
Yes.
Would you answer any questions put to you by His Honor?
Thank you, Captain Wilson. You may step down.
Wilson's evidence is greatly at variance with the Air New Zealand executive evidence already given, and Wilson becomes, after Hewitt, the second major casualty of the hearings.
Captain Wilson, the briefing officer, said he himself had no experience of flying down there despite having asked several times to be rostered on an Antarctic flight. Captain Wilson's evidence seems at variance with a statement made by Air New Zealand's chief executive, Morrie Davis, on the 24th of June, in which he said that Air New Zealand ensured that briefing officers flew over each of the company's routes regularly. And
Captain Ross Johnson conducted the simulator briefings for Collins and Simpson's crew. Johnson is adamant about the minimum altitudes, but when referring to the flight in 1977, which he himself commanded, he makes an extraordinary admission.
Whilst orbiting McMurdo Base, I requested clearance from air traffic control to descend. This was approved, and I descended to 3,000 feet.
Were you aware, in descending to 3,000 feet, that you were disobeying a restriction imposed by your employer?
Yes, I was.
Is it common for Air New Zealand pilots to disobey restrictions imposed by the company?
I would not believe so, but...
Had you done it before?
No, I had not. Not knowingly.
Well, you, when you were giving briefings, would have expected other pilots to obey your restrictions?
Yes, I would.
Why then, on this occasion, did you disobey a restriction?
That is something of which I'm certainly not proud. I don't believe in the context it took place it was unsafe. Of course, that doesn't condone it.
Did you, after your flight, tell any of your fellow pilots that you'd gone below the minimum restricted altitude?
No, I don't believe I did.
I saw a journalist holding up a number written on a piece of paper. 8, I believe. But either of you know what that signifies?
I can't say I saw it.
Gary?
I think they're just sort of, running their own truth is stranger than fiction competition, sir.
It had been made very clear at the briefing.
Johnson also reveals that although he understood the route to be over Erebus and briefed the crews accordingly, he himself had nevertheless flown down McMurdo Sound on his approach.
On your flight south, you departed from the planned track and proceeded to McMurdo down McMurdo Sound.
Yes, that is correct.
And you felt free to do that as long as you had air traffic control authority?
Yes, I did feel free to do that. And I'm sure it was well within the intent of the operation.
With regard to the slides that were being shown at the audio-visual briefing you gave Collins, was it not important that those slides depicted the track that you intended the aircraft to follow?
Yes, it was.
And we now know that certain slides depicted a different track, don't we?
Yes, we do.
If Captain Simpson, Gabriel and First Officer Irvine all considered that the route was down McMurdo Sound, if there was a misunderstanding as to whether Civil Aviation's approval had been given for descent in the McMurdo area, if the route had not been defined on any topographical map, if the briefing officer, Captain Wilson, thought that there could be a descent below 6,000 feet, and if there was not a proper understanding of whiteout,
would you agree that not only the briefing of Captain Collins, but the briefings for Antarctic flights in general were inadequate?
I would have to have a measure of agreement with you.
The navigation section was involved, the briefing section was involved, the simulator was involved, and head office was involved in arrangements with civil aviation. Whose responsibility was it to coordinate all those people involved in this area?
My responsibility.
What now?
The $64,000 question. We asked Johnson what Simpson said to him about the McMurdo destination coordinates. Simpson says he mentioned to Johnson a 27-mile cross-track difference.
If he did, if he actually mentioned the number of miles, then there's no excuse for Hewitt and Johnson treating the correction as 2.1 miles.
And no excuse for Hewitt not notifying Flight Dispatch, and no excuse for Flight Dispatch not telling your husband that his approach to McMurdo was taking him not over flat sea ice, but straight at a 13,000-foot volcano.
That telephone conversation with Captain Simpson took place after Simpson's flight, did it not?
I would take that as being correct.
Captain Simpson will say he did not mention the actual coordinates to you. Do you recall him mentioning a cross-track error?
Not in specific miles or magnitude.
Do you not recall him telling you he'd been surprised at seeing approximately 27-mile cross-track difference when he was overhead the TACAN navigation aid?
No, I do not.
Do I gather you made a record of what was said?
I noted it down, I believe.
Do you have that?
No. I don't believe I do. It was noted on a pad, and I believe I then processed the 3 points.
Oh, thank God it's Friday. Not over yet. Get our New Zealand Council in here.
David. Yes? The Commissioner would like to see you in his chambers.
David, it is axiomatic that no final conclusions on matters of credibility can ever be reached until all the evidence is heard. Yes, sir. However, I am bound to say that I have grave doubts about the navigation and briefing evidence. As far as the navigation evidence goes, for all I know, there may be a document produced which completely confirms that very involved series of errors. We shall wait and see. But as for the briefing evidence... Your Honor? The analysis of the flight recorder, I think you will agree, proves that Collins assiduously held that aircraft on its computerized flight track after each descending orbit. And if that is the case? If that is the case, David, then how can it still be said by your briefing officers that Collins and Cassidy really believe that computerized flight track led them towards Erebus? Are your briefing officers saying that Collins deliberately flew that aircraft at 1,500 feet straight into a mountain right in front of them? I am disturbed by the air of profound disbelief which seems to pervade these hearings. This is not a criminal trial. It is a public inquiry which is charged with finding the cause of a disaster in which 257 people lost their lives. Its raison d'etre is surely to prevent any reoccurrence of such a tragedy. And that is all.